President Recep Tayyip Erdogan calls it Turkey's second Independence Day. After a night of battles, the people of the country have fought off an attempted coup by members of the military. Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Friday night was a watershed moment for Turkey. Groups of soldiers appeared in areas across the country telling citizens to go home and stay indoors. This station and our sister channel in Ankara were taken off the air by armed soldiers who were part of a coup attempt. A statement read out declared that the military had taken control to maintain the country's secular democracy. But soon after, President Erdogan FaceTimed the nation, asking everyone who supported him and the country's civilian democracy to go out onto the streets. And they did. Protesters retook the nation's public spaces while the broader military and police fought back the coup supporters through the night. Today on the Newsmakers, we're looking at who carried out this attempt at a coup and why.
It began swiftly. Tanks driven by soldiers attempting a coup blocked the two bridges over the Bosphorus in Istanbul. Helicopters and military jets flew low across the skies of Istanbul and Ankara. Pro-coup soldiers surrounded the airport and government buildings, and then stormed state media offices. A faction of the army said it had taken over Turkey to ensure and restore constitutional order, democracy, human rights and freedoms. It announced martial law and imposed an immediate curfew. Parliament and presidential buildings in the capital were attacked from the air, and the coup plotters said the Turkish government had fallen. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan making a televised address using his mobile phone, calling for people to take to the streets. And the call was heeded. Large protests broke out across the country. Angry Turkish citizens confronting the coup plotters, armed with tanks and guns, with just flags and unified voices. Gunfire and explosions were heard across Istanbul and near Parliament in Ankara. Dozens were killed and thousands injured in the fierce protests. Thousands made their way to Istanbul's Ataturk airport. In the early hours, President Erdogan flew in, greeted by triumphant supporters.
They did not respect this nation's decisions, evident in their votes, and have betrayed the official elected government and the president, who by our constitution is their commander-in-chief. This is not going to end as they hoped.
By early morning, the balance had tipped and people power had won.
Citizens stood before and over the tanks and stood firmly and angrily against these people organising this coup attempt, almost lynching them, and without even waiting for the law enforcement. The citizens caught and detained them.
The coup plotters did not have broad backing from within the military or its leaders. The government says it was carried out by a small faction of Fethullah Gulen supporters. Gulen is a former imam living in self-imposed exile in the US. The state says Gulenists are trying to set up a so-called parallel state and are considered a terrorist organisation. Thousands of soldiers have been detained for their part in the coup attempt, including senior generals. President Erdogan has made it clear those involved will pay a heavy price. Life is returning to normal in Turkey, thanks to the will of its people, who rose up and fought to protect their democracy. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now in the studio to discuss the attempted coup is Gulnur Aybet. She's the director of the Centre for Security Studies at Bahçe Şehir University. We also have two guests in London. Wadda Khanfar is the president of Asharq Forum and former director general of Al Jazeera Network. And also in London is Emirhan Yorulmaz, who's Turkey's consul general in the British capital. Thanks, all of you, for joining us. Mr. Yorulmaz, if I could start with you, sir. Was it ever close to happening?
Actually, this has been a difficult night for Turkey and Turkish friends. Thankfully, the coup attempt has been averted thanks to the well-grown dynamics of Turkish democracy. Actually, the government is in charge now. The army is back in control, and the security forces has taken control of the situation. So overall, I think Turkey has passed this test of democracy thanks to its popular legitimacy.
Massive test. Gulnur Aybet, there was a time very early on in the evening when the Bosphorus Bridge was closed. There were tanks on the bridge. It takes a lot to get tanks onto the bridge. How did they manage to get to control so much so quickly?
I think they sort of probably did it gradually. There were certain roadblocks on the Asian side because I was at another television program last night, and when I left with the car, that's when it happened. And so by the time we got on the bridge, that's when the soldiers were already there. So we were right in the thick of it. We couldn't go forward, we couldn't go back. We were stuck on the bridge, and the soldiers were very nervous. They were quite aggressive at that point. There were tanks. But once we managed to get off the bridge, all the other main roads that were leading towards Üsküdar were also blocked. So my understanding is that they gradually blocked some roads and then were able to move the tanks onto the bridge rather than, move them while, roads were not blocked. That would have been more difficult.
Right.
But then, when I say gradual, it was also quite well organized because it must have happened very swiftly, because none of us knew what was going on. By the time we were on the bridge, we realized what was going on, and it was an absolute surprise to everybody.
Yeah, tremendous level of organization. Wadda Khanfar, do you believe that it's becoming clear as to why the coup plotters took those actions last night?
I think it was very clear to everyone that the democracy in Turkey and the institutions, the elected institutions in Turkey, are taking really very firm presence in the country. It seems that, from what I gather right now from the reports, that, by the end of this month or by next month, a lot of these people who have been accused of being part of the parallel organization, they might have been losing their, post in the army. So they wanted to do this definitely for a while now. The deep state in Turkey is not very happy with what is happening, and they have been trying continuously to undermine democracy in Turkey, and unfortunately with some kind of international atmosphere, especially some Western powers who were sympathetic in a way or another, and this was very clear to us from the late reaction from most of the European and the American administrations last night. It seems to me that they thought that they have a chance, but it was very clear that the army of today is not the army that used to topple governments through a memorandum posted on internet, as we remember in the previous coup, or other coups, the memorandum coups. It was just the army announced that they are taking over the country and government is over.
Right.
But the awareness of the public yesterday has proven that the democracy has moved way far from what Turkey used to experience through previous coups.
Yes, and we're going to look at the previous coups in a moment. But first, Mr. Yorulmaz, Wadda Khanfar mentioned that there's a sense of disappointment that maybe some Western nations were slow to respond or slow to show their backing of Turkey's democratically elected government. Are you disappointed in the slowness of their response throughout the night?
I think, we have to underline that international community has been resolute in condemning the attempt, actually. Especially Turkey's global and regional partners has been categorically condemning the coup attempt. From Iran to United States and to Russia to others, we have been getting their support for the democratic regime in Turkey. I think this is a positive development. Compared to other experiences that we have in the last couple of years about democracy and military coups, the Turkish case has been both domestically and internationally an important model, maybe. And we hope that we can keep this support for democratic regime in Turkey, both domestically and internationally.
So let me put it to you frankly then. Do you believe that you have the full support of your allies and they absolutely, resolutely support the democratically elected government in Turkey?
I mean, one of the most important things about Turkey is the Turkish regime has this legitimacy, popular legitimacy, and it's a very important asset. I mean, we have seen that civil society is so strong. They have been on the streets. I mean, they have been confronting the tanks, and they have been trying to persuade the army not to move forward. And I think, I mean, this was in a way an awkward situation, but a colleague in the army has made this attempt, but the domestic support was crucial. But on the other hand, we have to also underline that Turkey is part of the transatlantic community, and the transatlantic community has been underlining the need for democracy and popular regime. So I think in that sense, we have got international support.
Yeah, talking about that domestic support, Gulnur Aybet, so we didn't just have people who support President Erdogan and people who support the AK party. You know, there were CHP party members showing that in no way, shape or form did they ever want to see a coup. HDP party members. So officially and unofficially, you had even the opposition coming out and saying, we don't want a military coup, we don't want a military dictatorship, at a time when the society is very divided over many, many issues, particularly when you look at the HDP, for example. How important was that, and what does that tell you, Gulnur?
I think it was a historic moment when the president actually asked the people to take to the streets when the coup attempters were telling people to go home and not come out, and telling them actually there was a curfew. This is what they were shouting on the bridge. And people did take to the streets. And I know that there were quite a few of my friends were out there, and I've been speaking to them throughout the day. And from what we've been hearing is that, you know, people from all of the political spectrum were out there. They were side by side. So one of the historic things that's come out of this is that it's actually become a unifying force in a very polarized society. And as you know, the president was talking to the people through his mobile phone. And one of the first channels he was on was CNN Turk, which actually have been quite critical of the government in the past. And then at the end, when the coup attempters raided CNN Turk, there were people outside who had actually protested against CNN Turk last year, who were there to protect them this time. And I thought that was an interesting turning point, that people were standing in solidarity, no matter which side of the political spectrum they were on, against this attempted coup.
Right. Mr. Yorulmaz, we had the US Secretary of State, John Kerry, come out and say, you say it's Fethullah Gulen and the Gulen movement, produce evidence. How do we know that this was the Gulen movement and the deep state? How can we be absolutely sure?
I mean, the President and Prime Minister has made statements to that effect. Of course, we will have to see the background of this attempt in the coming days. I mean, as I said, what is important is Turkey should stay as a democratic ally in the region, and I think what John Kerry wanted to say is they want the security and stability of Turkey to continue. I mean, we are going through a very difficult period, especially in international relations, not only in the region, but overall in global terms. So Turkey's stability and security is very important for transatlantic partners, including the United States. So I think in that sense, we will have the full backing of the Obama administration.
Wadar Khanfar, 2,745 judges were sacked today in the aftermath, and we're hearing it's because they were Gulen linked. Is that the right decision to make today?
I think we should just put this coup in context. This is the second attempt that Gulen movement has attempted to create a coup in Turkey. You remember 18th of December 2014, we had also a sort of a coup. It was not military, but definitely judges were used and the security were used, the police was used in that kind of attempt. So since then, I think the importance of the situation was the following. This movement has infiltrated a lot of institutions in the state, the police, the judiciary, and the military. I think from now on, since the matter has reached a point of bloodshed and usage of military and jets and tanks in the streets of Turkey, I think definitely the state is not going to be soft or gentle in dealing with this. This now is undermining the very essence and existence of the state itself. So I'm sure that new attempts will be made from the state side in order to end the importance of this movement and to uproot whatever influence they have within the state.
Yes, Turkey is no stranger to coup attempts, official and unofficial, and very many successful coups over the years. Everybody stay where you are, because here's Francis Collins with a bit of a timeline of the many coups in modern Turkey.
1960 saw the first coup in the Turkish Republic and followed growing tension between the ruling Democratic Party and the opposition. The army stepped in May 1960 to topple the government of Prime Minister Adnan Menderes. In 1971, problems in the economy and social unrest created a tipping point. The military stepped in once again. It was an event known as the Coup by Memorandum, demanding a strong, credible government from the Prime Minister, Süleyman Demirel, who resigned hours later. The 1970s were a turbulent time with 11 changes of Prime Minister. In September 1980, army officers announced they were imposing martial law and dissolving the government. The military ruled for the next 3 years. In 1997, the government was given a range of recommendations by the military. Prime Minister Necmettin Erbakan of the Welfare Party agreed to several demands, including a ban on headscarves at universities, but was forced to resign soon after. On this occasion, the military didn't rule, and elections followed 2 years later.
So, Mr. Yorulmaz, we had a little look back at some of the many coups in the country. 1960, 1971, 1981, 1997. Those were all successful coups. The coup attempt last night failed. What was the main reason last night failed and the others were successful? What was the main difference?
I think the main difference was, especially after economic reforms in the 1980s and democratization and normalization after 2000s. The Turkish civil society has grown up. We have seen that people are more confident, the pluralistic society. They have owned the democratic regime. Last night, actually, the coup failed not because of security concerns, but because of domestic legitimacy concerns. And I think in this sense, Turkey has grown up democratically. But we have to also underline that the government has been resolute in standing for its domestic legitimacy. In that sense, both the prime ministers and then the president's statements to call people to go and own this regime has been very effective in averting the coup.
How would you compare what was attempted last night to what happened 3 years ago in Egypt? What was successful in the Egyptian coup? What was the difference there?
The difference actually is very simple. The people of Turkey has, reached a point of maturity, and they have reached a point of ability to stop the tanks. I think what happened, the ownership of the fact that the coup has failed last night should go to the public of Turkey, to the people, to the collective wisdom, to the crowd who were able, instinctively, to go down to the streets to stop the tanks and to undermine what is happening by the faction of the army. And I think that is very important. Second, I think, in my opinion, that the Western approach to any coup, like what happened in Egypt and what could have happened in Turkey, if we assume that the coup yesterday succeed, I have no doubt that Western governments would have given some time and maybe even some kind of, a positive, gentle approach in order to give the military some chance to take over the country. I have no doubt in that. It was clear from the first 2 hours that the attitude in the Western capitals was not really supportive of democracy. It was, in a way, giving some time to find out and some kind of statements and the usage of terminologies like the military uprising and so on and so forth. It was clear to me that there was, of course, we know in the media, in the Western media, how they did cover it. It was not really that kind of honest and straightforward. The fact Egypt, the military was able to take over and to put the president in jail and to establish themselves in the institutions of the state, I think the Western governments also gave acknowledgement to the coup in a way, and with time it has become a status quo. What happened yesterday by the public of Turkey did undermine any kind of attempt to legitimize the coup and did create a massive barrier in front of the military to take over the state, or at least the factions in the military. Beside the fact that the most important lessons that I will drive from last night is that the public awareness, which was across political, ideological, sectarian, and all kinds of factions of the society, was unbelievable. Because in Egypt we had very polarized society, and you had also part of the public against Muslim Brotherhood government. But what we have seen last night, this kind of consensus was unbelievable. It was amazing, it was very interesting, and that what led to the failure of the coup and to the success of democracy and the government.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned that consensus. Gulnur, let me pose a hypothetical to you then. You had people all against the notion of a military coup. Less than 24 hours ago, where we're sitting now, there were about 50 coup plotters inside here, kicking people out, taking their phones. They'd occupied a lot of state assets, strategic points. If they had pulled it off, hypothetically, what kind of Turkey would we be looking at today and beyond, with a society at odds with the military junta? What kind of Turkey would we have looked at? Would there have been bloodshed?
I think so. I mean, I don't even want to think about your hypothetical question. It sounds like a nightmare. But we also know that the government have actually seized documents about the plot that they made and how they would govern under martial law after, if the coup had been successul. So we would have seen...
There would have been pushback from people.
Yes, there would have been pushback. There would have been bloodshed. And there would have been further polarization or perhaps more unification. It's really hard to tell which way, the crowds would have tipped had it been, successful. But I think, one of the reasons why it wasn't successful is that also it didn't have overwhelming support within the whole military structure, because this was actually quite a small group within the military. And when I was on the bridge, I noticed that, yes, it was an aggressive group, but there weren't that many of them. They were thinly spread across all the buildings and strategic points that they tried to occupy. But let's remember, they weren't able to hold on to them for very long because in each point, their numbers weren't that high to begin with. And I think that was quite significant, because when we compare it to previous coups, like the 1980 coup that was initiated by generals at the very top of the Turkish General Staff, including the Chief of General Staff himself. What happened last night is they actually took the Chief of General Staff hostage.
Right.
And the coup attempters, there are some generals in them, but they're not very high-ranking in the whole structure of the General Staff. And by and large, most of them are colonels. So I think, that the rank business, and also the fact that these were smaller groups spread thinly around, had a lot to do with the tipping point of the legitimacy of the people who were unified and determined to stop this.
Right. Just enough time for a final question for Mr. Yorulmaz. What's the top priority now, sir? Is it to decapitate, to wipe out the deep state and those Gulenist elements that the government considers behind the coup?
I think this was an ongoing process. I mean, Turkey will focus on both domestic consolidation and reform, and as well as trying to consolidate its foreign security objectives. In that sense, domestically, I think constitution and, of course, the reforms would be the priority. But in that sense, Of course, the government would like to see such elements being persecuted and maybe go through the judicial process. But on the other hand, I think we also need to underline that Turkish foreign security objectives are very important. In that sense, the fight against both the PKK and Daesh would continue.
Okay, I've got to wrap, unfortunately. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. Thanks for your analysis and providing some context. That was thought-provoking Gulnur Aybet, Wadda Khanfar and Emirhan Yorulmaz. Thanks again. On this special edition of the Newsmakers, we looked at the attempted coup in Turkey and asked who carried it out and why. Thousands of soldiers have been detained, and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has said this is a God-given opportunity to carry out much-needed reforms to the military. Authorities believe the Gulenists are behind this, and as they plan their next steps, no response has been ruled out. From me, Imran Garda, and the rest of the team here at TRT World, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.